For 3 decades, the world has waited. It has waited with bated breath, with aching hearts, and with relentless curiosity. The name JonBenéт Ramsey has become synonymous with one of the most haunting and controversial unsolved mysteries in modern American history. A tragedy that unfolded on a cold December night, shaking a quiet Colorado town and sparking a media frenzy that would never fully subside. The death of JonBenéт was more than just a murder. It became a cultural phenomenon, a case that exposed the fragility of justice and the complexities of human nature. For 27 years, answers were elusive. Suspicions festered, theories multiplied, and the truth seemed to slip further and further out of reach. Families were torn apart. Careers were ruined. The public remained obsessed. And then, after all this time, a breakthrough of sorts. JonBenét's father, John Ramsey, has finally spoken out. After nearly 3 decades of silence, restraint, and private grief, he has chosen to break the silence. What he reveals now shakes the very foundation of what the world thought it knew about this case. His words don't just add to the narrative, they rewrite it, challenging the long-held assumptions, accusations, and beliefs that have surrounded the tragedy for decades. To understand the gravity of his revelations, it's essential to go back to where it all began, the early morning hours of December 26, 1996. The Ramsey family's home, a large and elegant house nestled in Boulder, Colorado, was still aglow with Christmas decorations. The air inside was heavy with the scent of pine, fresh cookies, and the faint hum of a holiday just past. Yet, beneath the surface of this picturesque scene, a nightmare was quietly unfolding. That morning, Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, placed a frantic 911 call. Her voice trembled as she reported that her 6-year-old daughter was missing. The call was filled with urgency, desperation, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. How could a child vanish from her own home overnight? Authorities arrived swiftly and began what should have been a thorough search. But the search quickly turned into a harrowing discovery. Hours later, John Ramsey himself found his daughter's lifeless body in the basement, a storage room that was dark, cold, and far removed from the warmth and safety of the family's living spaces. JonBenét's body bore chilling signs of violence. Duct tape was pressed tightly over her mouth, a crude garrote, a makeshift strangling device, was wound around her neck, and her small frame lay beneath a white blanket. Nearby, investigators found a ransom note, eerily detailed and bizarre in its tone. The note demanded $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year. This unsettling detail sent shockwaves through the investigation. Was it a coincidence? Or was the killer someone intimately familiar with the family's finances? The ransom note, with its strange language and peculiar demands, only deepened the mystery. It was unlike any other ransom note in history, 3 pages long, filled with oddly specific instructions and unsettling phrasing, as if written by someone trying to mislead or confuse. From the very beginning, the case was fraught with contradictions and unanswered questions. The media descended on Boulder like a storm. Headlines screamed accusations and speculation. The Ramseys, once simply grieving parents, quickly found themselves cast as suspects in the public eye. Whispers of doubt grew louder. Could the parents have been involved? Why hadn't they called the police sooner? What secrets were they hiding? The questions swirled in the court of public opinion, and the family was put under a microscope unlike any other. Yet, behind the scenes, the investigation was plagued by critical errors. The crime scene was not properly secured. Police officers allowed family members and friends to move freely through the house before forensic teams arrived. This contamination compromised crucial evidence, making it nearly impossible to reconstruct the sequence of events accurately. The infamous ransom note was analyzed by handwriting experts, but no definitive match was ever found. The DNA evidence uncovered at the scene remained inconclusive for years. Unknown male DNA was detected on JonBenét's clothing, yet it did not match any member of the Ramsey family. One of the most vocal voices in the investigation was Detective Lou Smith, brought in by the district attorney's office. Smith believed strongly in the intruder theory. He pointed to an open basement window that could have served as an entry point, marks on JonBenét's back that resembled wounds caused by a stun gun, and the mysterious male DNA as evidence that an unknown assailant had broken into the home. Despite these findings, much of law enforcement and the media refused to shift their focus from the family. The narrative was already set. The Ramseys were the convenient suspects. Public pressure demanded swift answers, and the complexity of the case was sacrificed for the sake of closure. Jon Ramsey has long maintained his innocence, but now, with the weight of nearly 3 decades behind him, he is not just defending himself, he is leveling a fierce attack against the system that failed his daughter and his family. He condemns the police investigation for its mishandling of evidence, accuses the media of turning the tragedy into a spectacle, and alleges a cover-up designed to protect the real killer. At 81 years old, Jon Ramsey is running out of time, but his resolve remains unbroken. He is calling for the latest DNA technology to be applied to the case, technology that has advanced dramatically since 1996. He believes that the scientific tools now available could finally identify JonBenét's killer, exposing the truth that has remained buried for far too long. We have the technology now, he insists. All we need is the will. But even as he speaks, the question lingers. Is the truth still waiting to be uncovered, hidden in plain sight within the old evidence and overlooked clues? Or has it been forever lost, swallowed by decades of missteps, silence, and denial? JonBené Ramsey's case is not just a story of a tragic death. It is a mirror reflecting the flaws in a broken system. It reveals how easily justice can be compromised by human error, bias, and the hunger for quick answers. For 27 years, the world has watched, waited, and wondered. Now, perhaps, it is time to finally listen. To hear the truth that Jon Ramsey is desperate to tell. To confront the uncomfortable questions we have avoided for too long. Because in the shadows of this heartbreaking mystery lies a painful truth. A truth that demands to be seen, acknowledged, and finally answered. Could the killer have been inside the house that night? For nearly 30 years, that chilling question has lingered like a shadow over the Ramsey family, the Boulder community, and the nation as a whole. It is a question that refuses to be forgotten, one that torments anyone who has followed the tragic story of JonBené Ramsey. From the moment the news broke, the idea that the murderer might have been someone close, someone inside the home, sparked a firestorm of suspicion and speculation. The beautiful, affluent home in Boulder was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of safety for a young child. But that night, something terrible happened behind those walls. Was the danger external, a random intruder? Or was it far more intimate and terrifying, that the threat was already inside, cloaked in familiarity? The media quickly seized on this question, weaving narratives that captivated and divided the public. Headlines screamed accusations. Pundits dissected every family photo and press conference. To many, the Ramseys were no longer just grieving parents. They became figures shrouded in mystery and mistrust. The narrative pushed by tabloids and talk shows was relentless. What were they hiding? Why had they delayed calling the police? Was there a motive buried deep within family secrets? For years, Jon Ramsey held his tongue. The public scrutiny was brutal, often crossing the line into harassment and suspicion. He watched as his family was torn apart not only by grief but by a tide of judgment and blame. Every interview, every media appearance was a tightrope walk, careful, measured, and guarded. His silence was not just a shield but a coping mechanism amid the storm of accusations and heartbreak. But that silence, after nearly 3 decades, has finally been broken. In a rare and candid interview, Jon Ramsey steps into the light, revealing a side of the story the world has rarely seen. The grief is still raw, the pain still present, but his voice carries something more, a fierce determination to reclaim the narrative, to challenge the assumptions, and to demand a new reckoning. He begins by addressing the heart of the question. Could the killer have really been inside the house? He acknowledges the media's relentless portrayal of his family as suspects. The speculation was overwhelming, he admits. We were treated like villains in our own tragedy. The pressure was immense. Every glance, every word, was twisted to fit a theory that suited the story people wanted to believe. Yet John insists that the truth is far more complicated. The focus on his family, he argues, was not the result of clear evidence but a rush to judgment fueled by sensationalism and a desperate need for answers. They wanted a quick resolution, he says. And when no immediate suspect emerged, it was easier to paint us as guilty. Behind the scenes, the investigation itself was fraught with errors. Police failed to secure the crime scene properly. Family members were allowed to move freely through the house before forensic teams arrived, contaminating vital evidence. The ransom note left behind, 3 pages of cryptic demands, remains an enigma, its author never conclusively identified. And DNA evidence uncovered years later pointed to an unknown male, someone not part of the Ramsey family. John Ramsey calls these investigative failures a tragedy within a tragedy, a cascade of mistakes that robbed the case of clarity and allowed suspicion to fester unchecked. The real killer is out there, he insists. But the system broke down before we could find them. As John speaks, it becomes clear that his silence was never acceptance. It was endurance. He endured the media storms, the public suspicion, and the legal battles because he believed, still believes, that someday the truth would come out. And now, armed with advancements in DNA technology and a renewed public interest, he is pushing harder than ever. We have tools now that we didn't have then, he says, his voice steady with hope. Technology that can identify someone from the smallest trace of DNA. All that's missing is the will to use it. But even as John Ramsey makes his final plea for justice, a darker question lingers. Has the truth already been buried beneath decades of denial and doubt? Is the real story lost forever in a fog of mishandled evidence and public suspicion? This is not just a story about a single murder. It is a reflection of a broken system. A system that failed a child, a family, and a community. It is a cautionary tale about how bias and the thirst for quick answers can blind even the most diligent investigators. For nearly 30 years, the world has looked on, waiting, guessing, hoping. Now, the time has come to listen, to really listen, to the man who has carried this unimaginable burden longer than anyone. To reconsider everything we thought we knew. Because sometimes, the darkest truths are the ones hiding closest to home. JonBenéт Ramsey was only 6 years old, a child whose innocence and charm captivated those around her. To many, she was a bright star already shining in a world that often feels dark and unforgiving. Known as a child beauty queen, JonBenéт had dazzled audiences with her sparkling smile and poised confidence far beyond her years. Her future was filled with promise, a life yet to be written, brimming with dreams most children her age could barely imagine. She was a little girl who loved to laugh, to twirl in her pageant dresses, to play with her older brother, Burke, and to live every day with the unfiltered joy and wonder that only a child can possess. But all of that, her laughter, her dreams, her very life, was stolen overnight in a tragedy that would shake a nation to its core and leave an indelible scar on the fabric of American history. The setting was Christmas morning, 1996, a time when families gather around warm fireplaces, unwrap carefully chosen gifts, and share moments of love and gratitude. But for the Ramsey family, the holiday season was shattered in the most unimaginable way. In the early hours of December 26th, Patsy Ramsey placed a desperate 911 call. Her voice was trembling with fear and confusion as she reported that her daughter JonBenéт was missing. The panic in her words was raw and palpable, the kind of anguish no parent should ever know. The call ignited a frantic search for the missing child, a race against time that would soon take a dark and devastating turn. But even as the search began, the crime scene told a sinister story. At the family's opulent home in Boulder, Colorado, investigators soon discovered a chilling ransom note left behind. The note was strange. Unlike any typical ransom demand, it was long, oddly worded, and laced with a theatrical tone that unsettled those who read it. The note demanded $118,000 in exchange for JonBenét's safe return. It wasn't just any figure. It was the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus for that year, a detail so precise it sent shockwaves through the investigation. This was no random number thrown out by a desperate kidnapper. It was a calculated sum, one that suggested the author had intimate knowledge of the family's finances. The coincidence was staggering. Was the ransom note a deliberate clue left by the killer, or a twisted attempt to misdirect and confuse investigators? Was the person behind JonBenét's disappearance someone inside the family circle, someone who knew their private lives in painful detail? The note itself was 3 pages long, written in a careful hand, filled with specific instructions and bizarre demands. It accused the Ramseys of mistreating JonBenét, threatening harm if the ransom was not paid promptly. The note warned against involving the police, a demand that would become a central point of contention in the investigation. From the outset, the ransom note became one of the most perplexing pieces of evidence in the case. Handwriting experts would analyze it for years, yet no definitive match was ever found. The language, the style, the content, all raised questions about the note's true origin and purpose. For the public, the ransom note was a haunting symbol of the mystery and tragedy that engulfed the Ramsey family. It was a chilling reminder that somewhere, hidden in the shadows, someone was watching, someone was holding the fate of a child in their hands. But the note also sparked suspicion and division. Why was the ransom amount so specific? How could the author know John Ramsey's bonus with such precision? These questions fueled rumors, conspiracy theories, and a media frenzy that often painted the Ramseys themselves as suspects rather than victims. As the investigation unfolded, the Ramseys found themselves under intense scrutiny. The media spotlight was relentless. Every action, every statement, every gesture was dissected and debated. The family who had lost a daughter and sister became the focus of suspicion and speculation, forced to defend themselves against a tide of public doubt. Yet behind the scenes, the truth was elusive. The ransom note remained a puzzle. The exact circumstances of JonBenét's disappearance and death were shrouded in contradictions and unanswered questions. The investigation would be marred by missteps and controversies that only deepened the tragedy. JonBenét's case was not just about a missing child or a ransom demand. It was about innocence lost in a world that suddenly felt cold and unforgiving. It was about the crushing weight of grief and the desperate search for justice. For the Ramsey family, Christmas morning would never be the same. The holiday that should have been filled with joy and celebration became the day their world shattered forever, a day marked by fear, confusion, and unimaginable loss. And for the world watching, it was the beginning of a nightmare that has lasted nearly 3 decades. A nightmare fueled by questions with no clear answers and a story that continues to haunt all who hear it. The ransom note, the duct tape pressed tightly over JonBenét's mouth, and the garrote wrapped cruelly around her neck. These chilling details didn't just confirm a brutal crime. They plunged the case into deeper darkness, raising more questions than answers. Each element was a piece of a puzzle that seemed deliberately designed to confuse, to mislead, and to torment those desperate for the truth. The note itself was unlike anything investigators had encountered before. Its length, tone, and bizarre demands set it apart from typical ransom notes, suggesting a mind twisted by calculation, or perhaps desperation. The language accused the Ramseys of mistreating their daughter, weaving a narrative that seemed as much about blame as about extortion. Why was the ransom note so long and theatrical? Was it a genuine cry for money, a final act of a desperate kidnapper hoping to exploit the family's wealth? Or was it a cruel message, left deliberately to mock the family's pain and frustrate the investigation? Some believed it was a stage distraction, an elaborate attempt to shift suspicion, misdirect the police, and buy time for the real killer to disappear. Then there was the haunting image of JonBenét herself, the small mouth silenced by duct tape, a symbol of innocence forcibly muted. The garrote, a crude yet lethal device, wrapped around her neck, a violent instrument that spoke to the personal nature of the crime. These details didn't just point to murder, they whispered of rage, control, and a darkness that went beyond a simple abduction gone wrong. Every new discovery seemed to deepen the mystery rather than bring clarity. The question wasn't just who had done this, but why? Why leave a ransom note that seemed almost theatrical in its tone? Why use such brutal methods on a child so young? As the investigation unfolded, these unanswered questions gnawed at everyone involved. The ransom note's authenticity, the significance of the duct tape and garrote, and the true meaning behind these disturbing clues became central to the debate, fueling theories that continue to swirl decades later. Was the note a genuine demand or a sinister taunt? Was the crime a calculated act of cruelty or a desperate attempt to cover something far more personal? The mystery deepened, and with it, the world's desperate search for truth grew more urgent than ever. In a rare and deeply emotional interview, Jon Ramsey finally breaks his silence, offering the world a glimpse into the profound pain and frustration that have shadowed him for nearly 30 years. For decades, his public statements were cautious, measured, carefully controlled. But behind the polished facade was a man crushed by grief, haunted by an unspeakable loss, and burdened by the unanswered questions that refused to leave his mind. Now, in this intimate conversation, the walls come down. The silence is shattered by a voice heavy with sorrow and raw with anger. There's no closure, Jon admits, his voice trembling with the weight of those words. I live with her memory every single day. Every morning I wake up, every night I lie down, she's there. It's a weight that never lifts, a shadow that never fades. This is not just a statement of mourning. It is a window into a life forever altered by tragedy, a life lived in the shadow of a child lost too soon. JonBenéт Ramsey was not just a daughter, she was a light that illuminated the lives of everyone who knew her. Her absence has left a void that no amount of time has healed. Yet, alongside this deep, unending grief, there is something else, an anger, fierce and unrelenting. It is an anger aimed not at the cruel hand of fate, but at the very system that was meant to seek justice for JonBenéт and failed. Jon does not hesitate to lay bare his frustration with the investigation that followed his daughter's death. In his eyes, what should have been a meticulous search for truth quickly spiraled into a series of mistakes and missteps so severe that they doomed the case from the start. The investigation was flawed, he says bluntly. Critical errors were made, evidence was mishandled, the crime scene was not secured properly, and we were treated like suspects instead of victims. It was a rush to judgment, not a search for justice. He recalls the early days with bitterness. Police officers allowed family members and friends to move freely throughout the Ramsey home before forensic teams arrived, contaminating the scene and destroying evidence that might have led to answers. A crucial window of opportunity was lost, one that could have uncovered the identity of the person who took JonBenét's life. But the damage didn't stop there. The infamous ransom note, which was left at the scene, was dissected endlessly, yet it never led to a definitive suspect. DNA evidence collected years later pointed to an unknown male, someone outside the family, evidence that was largely ignored or overshadowed by the relentless focus on Jon and Patsy Ramsey. It felt like we were fighting against the world, Jon says. While the real killer remained free, the spotlight was on us. We became the story not because of the facts, but because it was easier for the media and the police to focus their attention there. His frustration is compounded by the role the media played in shaping public perception. From the earliest days, sensational headlines painted the Ramseys as cold and calculating, accusing them of hiding secrets and casting doubt on their grief. Every public appearance was scrutinized, every word twisted, every tear questioned. We were vilified, he says quietly. The story wasn't about JonBenét anymore. It was about us, about guilt, about suspicion. And through it all, the truth remained buried. Despite the immense pressure, Jon Ramsey has never stopped believing in his daughter's innocence, and in his own. He has dedicated his life to fighting not just for justice, but for the truth to emerge. And now, nearly 30 years later, his determination remains as strong as ever. We have come a long way, he acknowledges. But there is still so much to be done. Advances in DNA technology offer hope that we didn't have back then. Evidence that was once unusable can now be tested with incredible precision. Jon's hope is not just for himself or his family, but for every victim whose case remains unresolved. He is calling on law enforcement to re-examine the evidence with fresh eyes and new tools. All we need now is the will, he insists. The technology is here. The question is, do they have the courage to use it? This interview reveals a man who has endured unimaginable loss, but who refuses to be silenced. John Ramsey's pain is evident, but so is his resolve. He is not just a grieving father, he is a relentless seeker of justice, demanding that the world not forget JonBené, and that the truth, no matter how difficult, finally be uncovered. As the interview concludes, one thing is clear: this is far more than a case frozen in time. It is a story of heartbreak and hope, failure and fight, darkness and the search for light. For John Ramsey, every day is a reminder of what was lost, but also a promise that he will never stop speaking out until his daughter's story is fully told. "There's no closure yet," he says one last time, voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I won't stop until there is." And with those words, the world is left with a powerful truth. Sometimes, the most painful silences are the ones waiting to be broken, and the most profound stories are the ones that refuse to be forgotten. John Ramsey doesn't just defend his innocence in the death of his daughter JonBené. He makes a far more startling claim. In a rare and revealing interview, his words cut deep into the heart of the investigation itself, accusing law enforcement of deliberately ignoring critical leads and covering up the truth. "We begged them to look outside the house," John says, his voice tight with frustration and sorrow. "We told them there was more to this case than they were willing to admit, more than they wanted to hear. But they shut us down. They didn't want to hear it." The weight of those words hangs heavy in the air. For decades, the official narrative focused almost exclusively on the family, painting John, Patsy, and even JonBenét's older brother, Burke, as suspects in a tragedy that devastated them all. Yet John insists that from the very beginning he and his wife pleaded with police to consider other possibilities that would have taken the investigation far beyond the walls of their home. John recalls the early days of the investigation with painful clarity. The police arrived amid a media frenzy, the house swarming with reporters and curious neighbors. But instead of launching a comprehensive search for an intruder or unknown suspect, investigators fixated on the family. Police allowed family members and friends to move freely throughout the home before the crime scene was secured, a critical error that contaminated evidence and complicated the path to justice. More disturbing to John was the police's refusal to pursue what he and Patsy believed were credible leads pointing outside the family circle. An open basement window, which could have served as a point of entry for an intruder, was overlooked or dismissed. Unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing was never properly investigated or matched to any suspect. "We showed them the evidence," John says. "We begged them to follow those leads. But the investigation was so focused on us that they ignored everything else." This tunnel vision, he believes, was not accidental. Instead, it was the result of pressure on law enforcement to quickly solve a high-profile case, to provide answers to a shocked and demanding public. And the Ramseys were the most convenient scapegoats. They had a story they wanted to tell, John explains. A story where the parents were guilty, and the mystery was solved. That story was easier to sell, easier to close. But it wasn't the truth. The consequences of this narrow focus were devastating, not just for the Ramsey family, but for the pursuit of justice itself. Vital clues were ignored, potential suspects were never pursued, and the real killer, whoever they were, slipped through the cracks. John's accusations go beyond frustration. They suggest a deliberate effort to misdirect the investigation, to protect someone or something. He speaks of a cover-up, a dark undercurrent that tainted the case from the start. "It's not just incompetence," he insists. "There was a willful blindness. They wanted to protect themselves, their department, and their reputation. That meant sacrificing the truth and us in the process." This belief that the investigation was compromised is echoed in the opinions of several experts who have reviewed the case. Detective Lou Smith, brought in by the district attorney's office, was a vocal advocate for the intruder theory and was frustrated by the resistance he faced from other law enforcement officials. For years, he insisted the evidence pointed away from the family and towards a stranger who had broken into the home. Yet Smith's theory was sidelined, and the case remained mired in suspicion toward the Ramseys. DNA evidence, particularly the unknown male profile discovered years after JonBenét's death, remains one of the most compelling pieces of evidence pointing to someone outside the family. but that evidence was never aggressively pursued in a way that could have brought the real perpetrator to justice. John Ramsey's public accusations come at a time when advances in DNA technology offer new hope. Techniques that didn't exist in 1996 can now analyze tiny, degraded samples with remarkable accuracy. He has been vocal in demanding that authorities reopen the case, retest the evidence, and apply modern forensic science without bias or preconceived notions. "We have the technology now," he says firmly. "What we don't have is the will. The courage to look beyond what's comfortable and admit mistakes. That's what needs to change." For John, this is not just about clearing his family's name, it's about finding the person who took his daughter's life. It's about restoring faith in a justice system that has failed his family and so many others in cases complicated by public pressure and investigative mistakes. "We didn't just lose our daughter," John says quietly, "we lost faith in the people who were supposed to protect us, in the system that was supposed to seek the truth." His words carry a profound sadness, a grief compounded by betrayal. The man who once sat silently as rumors swirled now speaks out forcefully, demanding accountability not just from the killer but from the very institutions entrusted with justice. This is not just a defense of innocence, it is a call for transparency, for a reckoning with the failures of the past. It is a plea for those who have the power to reopen the case, to look beyond old biases, and to use every tool at their disposal to finally bring closure. JonBené deserves that much, John insists. We all deserve that much. His voice, though burdened with sorrow, is resolute. He knows the road ahead will be difficult, entwined with painful memories, legal battles, and the weight of public scrutiny. But for him, the fight is far from over. "We may be decades past that terrible day," he says, "but I will never stop searching for answers. I owe it to JonBené. I owe it to every parent who has lost a child and to every victim waiting for justice." In the end, John Ramsey's story is not just about a family torn apart by tragedy. It is about the fragility of truth in the face of fear and convenience. It is about the dangers of rushing to judgment without evidence, and the devastating consequences when justice is sacrificed for expediency. For nearly 30 years, the Ramseys have borne the brunt of suspicion and silence. Now, John Ramsey demands more than defense. He demands justice, transparency, and the courage to uncover the truth, no matter where it leads. Because in the shadows of this haunting case lies a simple, unyielding truth. The real killer is still out there, and the world deserves to know who they are. The investigation into JonBené Ramsey's tragic death was flawed from the very start, a fact that has haunted the case and cast a long shadow over the pursuit of justice for nearly 3 decades. The failures were not minor missteps. They were critical errors that compromised the entire process of uncovering what truly happened on that fateful night in Boulder, Colorado. From the moment law enforcement arrived at the Ramsey home on December 26, 1996, the crime scene was mishandled. Instead of being treated as a carefully preserved space awaiting forensic examination, the house was turned into a revolving door. Family members, friends, and even police officers themselves were allowed to move freely throughout the rooms, disturbing or destroying evidence that could have been crucial in solving the case. This failure to secure the crime scene was more than a procedural mistake, it was a catastrophic loss. The delicate trail of physical evidence that forensic experts depend on to reconstruct the sequence of events was irreparably damaged. Footprints, fibers, and other trace evidence became contaminated. Potential clues were lost forever. The opportunity to catch the killer at their most vulnerable moment slipped away as the scene was inadvertently compromised. Adding to the confusion was the discovery of a ransom note, a chilling, 3-page demand for $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year. The note was unlike any typical ransom letter. Its language was strange and theatrical, filled with unusual phrasing that left investigators baffled. It accused the Ramseys of mistreating their daughter and warned that harm would come if the ransom was not paid. Yet, despite intense scrutiny from handwriting experts, no definitive link has ever been established between the ransom note and any individual connected to the case. The handwriting samples from family members, friends, and known acquaintances were compared against the note with inconclusive results. The note's author remains unknown, a ghostly presence in the narrative of JonBenét's death. The specificity of the ransom amount, matching the father's Christmas bonus, only deepened the mystery. It suggested that the person who wrote the note had intimate knowledge of the family's financial details, which raised suspicions that the crime could have been an inside job or at least committed by someone close to the family. But no such person was ever definitively identified. Further complicating the investigation was the discovery of DNA evidence found on JonBenét's clothing years after the initial crime scene processing. The DNA belonged to an unknown male who was not related to the Ramseys. This should have been a breakthrough, an undeniable lead pointing toward an intruder or stranger. Instead, this crucial evidence was largely sidelined or ignored by investigators who remained focused on the family as suspects. The handling of this DNA evidence sparked controversy and criticism among forensic experts and advocates for the Ramsey family. Many argued that the DNA should have been the centerpiece of the investigation, pursued aggressively to identify the individual it belonged to. Instead, the focus on the Ramseys created a tunnel vision that stalled the case and allowed the true perpetrator to evade capture. Moreover, the initial investigative decisions were influenced by intense media pressure and public scrutiny. From the outset, the case was a media circus, with reporters and cameras swarming the Ramsey home and every twist in the story splashed across headlines worldwide. Law enforcement officials were under enormous pressure to solve the case quickly, which may have led to shortcuts, hasty conclusions, and a desire to control the narrative rather than uncover uncomfortable truths. This atmosphere of urgency and spectacle created an environment where errors flourished and critical evidence was mishandled or overlooked. The case became as much about managing public perception as about following the evidence wherever it led. The result has been a case shrouded in uncertainty, frustration, and unanswered questions. The real perpetrator remains unidentified, while the Ramseys were subjected to suspicion and public scrutiny for years, despite never being formally charged. For the family and many who have followed the case, the investigative failures are a source of profound sorrow and anger. They believe that if the crime scene had been properly secured, if the ransom note had been definitively analyzed without bias, and if the DNA evidence had been pursued fully, justice might have been served long ago. Instead, the investigation stands as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mishandling evidence, the consequences of rushing to judgment, and the devastating impact of media pressure on law enforcement decisions. Nearly 30 years later, the case of JonBenéт Ramsey remains a haunting enigma, a story of a beautiful young life cut tragically short, and an investigation marred by mistakes that may have robbed the world of answers. Yet, with advances in forensic technology, there is still hope. Modern DNA analysis methods can work with degraded or limited samples to produce clearer results. Advocates and family members continue to call for the case to be reopened and for the evidence to be tested with these new tools. The hope is that one day, the mystery surrounding the ransom note, the contaminated evidence, and the unknown DNA profile will be solved. Until then, the case remains a painful reminder of what happens when justice is compromised and the truth slips through the cracks. John Ramsey has consistently insisted that his family was unfairly and unjustly targeted during the investigation into the tragic death of his daughter, JonBené. Over the years, he has voiced deep frustration with how the spotlight fell disproportionately on the Ramseys, painting them not as grieving parents but as prime suspects. This intense scrutiny, he argues, was not based on concrete evidence but rather on circumstantial suspicions fueled by a rush to close the case quickly. "We were painted as villains," John has said in interviews, his voice heavy with pain and disbelief. "But the truth is, we were the victims here, victims of a crime, but also victims of an investigation that lost its way." His claim that the family was unfairly targeted opens a troubling question. Was justice sacrificed in favor of expediency? Did the pressure to find a culprit quickly cause investigators to overlook vital evidence and ignore alternate leads, allowing the true perpetrator to remain free? The JonBenéт Ramsey case captivated a nation. It was more than just a criminal investigation. It became a media spectacle, with headlines, speculation, and public opinion swirling endlessly. This enormous pressure created an atmosphere where law enforcement officials were desperate to provide answers and closure. In that charged environment, focusing suspicion on the family became the easiest path to apparent resolution. However, this tunnel vision came at a great cost. Critical leads pointing to possible intruders, such as the presence of unknown male DNA and signs of forced entry through the basement window, were either ignored or minimized. Key forensic evidence was compromised, and alternative theories were dismissed prematurely. Experts and former investigators have since criticized the handling of the case, noting that the desire for a swift conclusion overshadowed a careful, unbiased pursuit of the truth. The investigation became less about uncovering facts and more about fitting a narrative, one that, unfortunately, implicated innocent people. Jon Ramsey's assertions compel us to reflect on a larger, more systemic issue. When the pressure to solve a case quickly becomes overwhelming, does thoroughness and objectivity suffer? And at whose expense? The consequences of such a flawed approach are profound. The Ramseys endured years of public suspicion and personal torment, their reputations tarnished by allegations they fought tirelessly to refute. Meanwhile, the true killer, whoever they may be, remained free, their identity obscured by investigative missteps and a premature rush to judgment. This situation poses difficult questions about justice itself. Is justice truly served when a case is closed for the sake of expediency, but the truth remains elusive? What price do victims and their families pay when the wrong people become suspects and the real perpetrator continues to evade accountability? The legacy of the JonBenéт Ramsey case may serve as a cautionary tale. It underscores the dangers of sacrificing justice on the altar of speed and convenience, and the tragic consequences that follow when the innocent are presumed guilty and the guilty go unpunished. Jon Ramsey's fight is not only for his daughter's memory but also for the integrity of the justice system. His story reminds us all that true justice demands patience, rigor, and an unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth, no matter how difficult or inconvenient that truth may be. In the end, his words challenge us to consider, has the world learned from this painful chapter? Or will the rush to judgment continue to undermine the very justice we seek? Detective Lou Smith's involvement in the JonBenéт Ramsey case marked a critical moment of hope amid a clouded and controversial investigation. Unlike many in law enforcement and the media who quickly zeroed in on the Ramsey family as suspects, Smith held firm to a different belief, that an intruder, an unknown outsider, was the true perpetrator of this horrific crime. Smith, a veteran detective with decades of experience in solving cold cases, was brought in by the district attorney's office precisely because the original investigation had stalled and become mired in speculation. His reputation for thoroughness and dedication to facts made him an ideal candidate to re-examine the case from a fresh perspective. From the outset, Smith meticulously combed through the evidence, questioning assumptions and challenging prevailing theories. What he found was a trail of clues that seemed to point away from the family and toward someone entirely unknown. At the heart of his theory was the discovery of DNA evidence that baffled investigators for years. On JonBenét's clothing, forensic analysts found DNA belonging to a male who was not related to the Ramseys or any known person connected to the household. This piece of evidence was significant, potentially the most direct forensic link to the person who was in the house at the time of the crime. Smith understood the importance of this unknown DNA. He believed it was the strongest indication that the crime was committed by a stranger, not a family member. Yet, despite the promise of this lead, the investigation largely ignored or downplayed this evidence, instead maintaining a focus on the family. Beyond the DNA, other physical evidence lent weight to the intruder theory. Smith pointed to injuries on JonBenét's body consistent with the use of a stun gun, a non-lethal weapon that could have been employed to incapacitate the child. The presence of bruises and marks suggested a calculated, methodical approach rather than a spontaneous act. Such a detail transformed the understanding of the crime. If a stun gun was used, it implied the assailant was prepared, possibly experienced, and determined to control the situation. This was not a crime of passion or domestic dispute but one executed with cold intent. Another vital clue supporting Smith's theory was the open basement window discovered during the investigation. The window's position and condition suggested it may have served as an entry or exit point for the intruder. This detail aligned with reports of unusual footprints near the home and the possibility that someone could have entered or fled without being seen. Yet, despite these compelling pieces of evidence, Detective Smith's intruder theory faced stiff opposition. Law enforcement officials and much of the media were reluctant to divert attention from the family, perhaps due to the convenience of a quick resolution or the sensational appeal of a family scandal. Smith himself expressed frustration with the resistance he encountered. "They wanted a quick resolution," he later explained, "and we were convenient." This blunt admission highlighted the pressure on investigators to provide answers swiftly, even if it meant ignoring evidence that didn't fit the dominant narrative. The conflict between Smith's objective analysis and the prevailing assumptions underscores a fundamental problem in the case: the tension between pursuing truth without bias and succumbing to external pressures. Over time, Smith's voice became a beacon for those advocating for a renewed look at the case with fresh eyes and modern forensic technology. His insistence on following the DNA lead and considering the intruder theory helped keep alive the hope that justice could still be served. In the decades since the tragedy, advances in DNA testing and forensic science have revolutionized criminal investigations. Techniques such as genetic genealogy have cracked cold cases that once seemed unsolvable. Advocates argue that if the JonBenét's case were reopened and the unknown DNA analyzed with today's technology, it could finally lead to the real killer. Detective Lou Smith's legacy is inseparable from this hope. He stands as a reminder of the importance of unwavering dedication to facts and the courage to challenge accepted narratives, even when it is unpopular or difficult. His belief that the evidence screams intruder invites the world to reconsider the case, to question past conclusions, and to demand that justice is not sacrificed for convenience. Yet, despite the passage of nearly 30 years, the truth remains elusive. The real perpetrator has never been identified or brought to justice. The mystery endures, leaving a family forever broken and a community haunted. In reflecting on Detective Lou Smith's work, one confronts the painful reality of what happens when investigations are derailed by bias or external pressures. The Ramsey case serves as a cautionary tale, one where the pursuit of justice was clouded by sensationalism and expediency. For those who believe in the intruder theory, and for the family who has never stopped seeking answers, Smith's work represents both a promise and a challenge, that the truth is out there, waiting to be uncovered, and that justice delayed is justice denied. As forensic science continues to advance and new generations take up the cause, the hope remains that one day the silence will break, the shadows will lift, and the full story of what happened to JonBenéт Ramsey will finally be told. Until then, Detective Lou Smith's conviction serves as a solemn call to never stop questioning, never stop searching, and never accept a convenient story when the evidence demands more. The pressure to solve the JonBenéт Ramsey case quickly was immense, from both the media and the police themselves. Yet, despite growing evidence pointing toward an intruder, both law enforcement and the press stubbornly refused to shift their focus away from the Ramsey family. The media and police wanted it wrapped up fast. John Ramsey has said, his voice heavy with frustration. And we were convenient. This stark admission reveals a troubling truth about the investigation. Rather than pursuing every lead with impartiality, investigators seemed eager to close the case quickly, any case that would satisfy public demand and quell the relentless media circus. In their haste, they fixated on the most accessible suspects, the grieving parents and their family. The complex and unsettling possibility of an unknown intruder lurking in the shadows was too difficult to entertain, too disruptive to the tidy narrative they sought. For the Ramseys, this meant years of suspicion, scrutiny, and public vilification while the true perpetrator remained free, perhaps even watching from the sidelines as the family was cast into the spotlight. This relentless drive for closure highlights a darker side of high-profile investigations, the temptation to sacrifice thoroughness and truth in favor of convenience and speed. The question remains, did this rush to judgment allow the real killer to slip away? And if so, what price has justice paid for such haste? In the end, the case serves as a somber reminder that justice cannot be rushed, and that the pursuit of truth demands patience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to following the evidence, wherever it may lead. Now 81 years old, John Ramsey stands at a crossroads between the passage of time and the enduring hope for justice, a hope that has fueled his relentless pursuit of answers for nearly 3 decades. Though years have passed since the tragic death of his daughter JonBené, his determination remains unshaken. In fact, it burns brighter than ever, galvanized by the incredible advances in DNA technology that promise to shed new light on a case once thought cold and closed. The landscape of forensic science has transformed dramatically since 1996. Methods that were once theoretical or limited to the most advanced laboratories are now widely available and extraordinarily precise. Genetic genealogy, for example, has solved decades-old mysteries by tracing familial DNA connections through public databases, identifying suspects who otherwise would have remained anonymous. Massively parallel sequencing and enhanced DNA extraction techniques allow forensic scientists to analyze tiny, degraded, or mixed DNA samples with accuracy that was unimaginable at the time of JonBenét's death. John Ramsey has become a vocal advocate for the application of these cutting-edge technologies to his daughter's case. In interviews and public statements, he emphasizes that the tools to unlock the mystery already exist. "We have the technology now," he asserts firmly, "all we need is the will." This succinct phrase encapsulates a powerful truth. Scientific capability alone is not enough. The willingness of law enforcement, prosecutors, and the justice system to fully embrace these advances and revisit old evidence is crucial. At the center of this renewed hope is the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, a discovery that emerged years after the initial investigation. This DNA does not match any member of the Ramsey family or known acquaintances, and it represents perhaps the most direct forensic clue to an intruder's presence. Yet, despite its significance, this evidence has remained largely underutilized in the official pursuit of justice. John Ramsey contends that modern testing could finally identify the source of this DNA and bring clarity to decades of uncertainty. But John's advocacy is not just a technical argument, it is deeply personal. He speaks with the voice of a father who has lived every day with the agony of unanswered questions. He knows that time is precious, not only because he is aging but because with each passing year, memories fade, witnesses pass away, and the chance for justice grows more fragile. "Time is not on my side," he admits with quiet urgency. "But I will not stop fighting, because JonBené deserves the truth. And so do all families waiting for justice." His words resonate far beyond his own tragedy. They echo the universal struggle of victims' families who confront not only grief but also the challenge of systems that sometimes falter. Despite his persistence, John's calls for renewed investigation have faced obstacles. Institutional inertia, budget constraints, and competing priorities often stall cold cases, even those with compelling evidence. Bureaucratic resistance can slow the re-examination of decades-old files, while fear of reopening painful wounds or facing past errors complicates efforts to revisit unresolved crimes. Yet John remains undeterred. He understands that the fight for truth is often a marathon, not a sprint. He channels his grief into advocacy, hoping to inspire law enforcement agencies to act with courage and transparency. His public appeals serve as both a memorial to JonBené and a beacon of hope for justice to prevail. In this final push, John Ramsey embodies the profound human spirit that refuses to accept silence in the face of tragedy. His journey is a testament to the enduring power of hope, the unyielding demand for truth, and the belief that technology, combined with willpower, can overcome even the darkest mysteries. As forensic science continues to evolve, the promise remains that the story of JonBené Ramsey is not yet finished. With renewed effort and advanced tools, the truth may finally come to light, bringing long overdue answers, justice for a lost child, and healing for a family who has waited far too long. Until that day arrives, John Ramsey's fight stands as a solemn reminder. No matter how many years pass, no matter how cold a case becomes, the pursuit of justice must never cease. Because behind every cold file is a human story, a life lost, a family broken, and a truth waiting to be uncovered. The JonBené Ramsey case continues to cast a long, dark shadow over America's collective consciousness, an unsettling emblem of justice delayed, if not outright denied. Nearly 30 years have passed since the tragic night when a 6-year-old child's life was stolen in the most brutal of ways, yet the haunting questions surrounding her death remain painfully unanswered. This case has become more than a headline or a cold file. It has become a symbol of the fragility of truth and the limitations of the justice system when confronted with a high-profile, emotionally charged investigation. Across the country, JonBenét's story resonates deeply, not just because of the innocence lost, but because it exposes the vulnerabilities and failures that can pervade even the most urgent criminal inquiries. It raises difficult and unsettling questions. How can a child's killer remain unidentified for so long? Why were key pieces of evidence mishandled or ignored? And why has the relentless pursuit of justice seemingly stalled? For many, the case feels like an open wound, a reminder that in the pursuit of truth, time can be both an ally and an adversary. As the years accumulate, memories fade, witnesses pass away, and the pressure to close the case can lead to shortcuts or tunnel vision. This case has shown how public opinion, media frenzy, and investigative missteps can conspire to obscure facts rather than reveal them. Yet amidst the lingering shadows, the most profound and unsettling question remains: is the truth still hidden in plain sight? Could the answers be waiting quietly among the existing evidence, obscured only by the passage of time, bias, or fear of confronting uncomfortable realities? Or has the truth been buried deep beneath layers of silence, misdirection, and deception, concealed by those who might have had reasons to keep it hidden? These questions have fueled countless theories, debates, and investigations. Some believe that critical evidence was mishandled or deliberately suppressed to protect certain individuals or institutions. Others hold on to hope that the rapid advancements in forensic science will one day pierce the veil of uncertainty and identify the person responsible. What makes this case so profoundly tragic is not just the loss of a young life, but the enduring pain inflicted by the unknown. The Ramsey family has lived under a cloud of suspicion, grief, and public scrutiny, while the killer remains free, their identity obscured. The community of Boulder, once shaken to its core, continues to grapple with the unresolved trauma that this case represents. The broader implications reach far beyond one family or one town. The JonBenéт Ramsey case has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of rushing to judgment and the consequences of investigative errors. It highlights the critical need for law enforcement to approach every case with meticulous care, free from the influence of media pressure or public expectation. It also underscores the importance of preserving and re-examining evidence as scientific techniques evolve. This unresolved mystery reminds us that justice is not just about catching a perpetrator quickly. It is about ensuring that the right person is held accountable, that the truth is uncovered no matter how inconvenient or difficult it may be. It calls for patience, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to fairness. As forensic science continues to advance at an unprecedented pace, there is renewed hope that what was once impossible may now be within reach. Techniques like genetic genealogy have revolutionized cold case investigations, solving mysteries that had confounded authorities for decades. Many advocates believe that if the JonBenéт Ramsey case were reopened with full access to modern technology, the unknown male DNA and other overlooked evidence could finally lead to the identification of the true killer. John Ramsey's tireless advocacy embodies this hope. Despite his own advancing age and the passage of nearly 3 decades, he refuses to give up on the pursuit of truth and justice for his daughter. His public calls for renewed investigation, for using every tool science has to offer, serve as a powerful reminder that no case should ever be closed until justice is truly served. Ultimately, the case of JonBenéт Ramsey is more than a tragic crime. It is a reflection on the human cost of uncertainty, the struggle between truth and convenience, and the resilience of those who seek answers against all odds. Only time will tell whether the silence will finally be broken. Whether the truth that has long eluded investigators and the public alike will emerge from the darkness and bring peace to a grieving family and closure to a nation still searching for answers. Until that day comes, the story of JonBenét Ramsey remains a somber testament to the enduring power of hope, and a call to never stop seeking the truth, no matter how elusive it may seem.